The next thing I want to talk about is the pelvis. So there's two movements of the pelvis. The first is the relative movement of the pelvis. When I say relative movement of the pelvis, I mean the pelvis do in flare and out flare movement. Okay, so in flare and out flare. And it also do this kind of innominate flexion and extension movement. Okay, so it's the pelvic, it needs to be able to do this kind and this kind of movement. Okay, in terms of orientation of the pelvis, if your pelvic lose the ability to do this kind of relative movement, it will then compensate by doing an orientation. So going anterior tilt and then posterior tilt or lateral tilt or oblique tilt. Okay, front, back, side, and here, oblique. These are orientation. They are usually a compensation movement. So what I mean is that, for example, in order for you to internal rotate the femur, our innominate bone, our bone need to be able to go into an in-flare position. So when we are in in-flare position, then our femur can go into an external rotation and internal rotation. And if our femur wants to go into an external rotation, the bone needs to be able to open up. So once we can open this bone here, then we can go more, we can have more access to external rotation. So what happens if you lack internal rotation of the femur because your bone can't in-flare, can't close here? Then what happens is your pelvic bone would just go into an anterior tilt. When you are here, then your femur can internal rotate. Okay. The same thing goes with the shoulder. If my shoulder internal rotation is up to this point and I can't internal rotate my shoulder anymore, what my body does to access more internal rotation is I would go into this. I will go into an anterior tilt of the pelvic. So when I anterior tilt, I can go more internal rotation because I can't do any more internal rotation. Okay, same thing. If I can't access internal rotation, I would go into anterior tilt so I can go into more internal rotation. Or another way is, because I can't do this internal rotation, my pelvic will tilt forward like this in order for me to go into internal rotation. So what we want to do usually to correct the pelvic is to correct the orientation of the pelvic. If you are in here, we want to tuck it back here. If you are in here, we want to bring it back here first. And then once we are in here, this position, we want to have access to in-flare, out-flare, and this kind of movement. Okay? For people who have tight glutes, like they feel like their glutes are always contracted, this is what happens. So, so the lower part of the glutes is quite tight, and then bringing the this area and this area closer together. When you bring them closer together, this is your position of the pelvic. Okay. When the glutes is tight and you are in this position, you can't close here. So you are stuck in this position. So you have a tight glutes. And when you're in this position, then you can easily access external rotation. Okay. So this is for you to access external rotation. And as you can see, this is a walking cycle of the gait. We are supposed to move in this manner. You can notice the sacrum, this bone is moving in different direction. Okay. So when we talk about tight piriformis or So we know that the piriformis muscles attach from here towards the femur. And if we have a tight piriformis, it's because our pelvic is stuck in a certain position. It's either stuck in this direction or it's stuck in this direction. And you can imagine that if you are stuck in this direction, then the piriformis would be tighter on one side and would be more elongated on one side. Okay, you can release the piriformis as much as you want. That might bring you back to normal, or you can try to reposition your pelvic into a neutral manner to relax the muscles that's surrounding. So for me now, it's not about releasing muscles. It's more about getting the joints to be in a more neutral state so that your pelvic can access in flare, out flare, and then moving forward, backwards, anterior, posterior, side. It is we want the movement variability for your pelvic in order for you to be healthy. And every time when you are stuck in a certain manner, doesn't matter you are stuck in this position, or you're stuck in here, or you're stuck in here, or you're like this, as long as we are able to bring your pelvic back to a more neutral state, then you know you are able to access all range of movement that you're supposed to have.